What's going on, y'all? You're checking out the Winner Circle here on thisis50.com. It's your boy June Archer, my brother here, Paul Prestia. Keep it locked right here.
Are you ready to win?
Yeah.
Come join the winning circle.
Fuck with the winners, baby.
Put up your hands for me, baby.
Put them up.
And do it like we're supposed to.
Yeah.
'Cause we're gonna win.
Consider this the theme song for victory. Shit you say to yourself when you made history. I'm trying to make it feel like the first.
What's going on, y'all? I got attorney Paul Prestia here, your boy June Archer, the Winner Circle here, and we're going to be talking about some really deep conversation coming off the Kalief Browder story. Some of you guys checked it out on Spike TV. This was his attorney. Great person. He's a hero. So I have him here today. We're going to talk about life. We're going to talk about a little bit about the documentary. But before we get started, Paul, I want to thank you so much for being a part of Kalief's story.
Thank you, John. I'm honored to be here.
I'm so happy to be here, and we're going to talk about some great things. I want to start with you specifically. What made you gravitate towards Kalief? Because there's plenty, based on what I saw in the documentary, there are a ton of Kalief Browders out there. But for you, what made you gravitate towards Kalief specifically? Or was it a few things?
Well, I think the main thing was when I first met him. You have to understand, when I first met him, he had just come out of jail. Probably 3 or 4 weeks he had been home. And so when he came into my office, and we're talking 800 days and nights in solitary confinement. And when upon his release, he wasn't provided any medical attention or any psychiatric or care or counseling. He was just let off into the streets, back into society to find his way. So when I first met him, he was so broken. So you could see the anger, the pain, the resentment that he had for those years that he lost.
Right.
You know? And it was so powerful, just meeting him in the beginning. I felt like part of me was compelled to, not only as an attorney, but even more so as a human being, to look out for him, to say, I need to take this kid under my wing and help him out. And the thing was, at that time in my life, I'd just been through a separation, almost at the simultaneous to when Kalief had gotten released. So I was going through something personal as well. So just having him in front of me and having something to latch onto, like that type of case, it really allowed me gave me some focus, and he really blessed me with a cause. He didn't even realize it, but a cause to fight for him and to sort of become a champion for the civil rights movement.
Right.
That it all became. And at first I didn't even see it as this big case.
Right.
When it was presented to me, not to get too legally technical, it was presented as a false arrest case where he was charged with a robbery and spent 3 years in jail, part of that time in solitary confinement. Solitary wasn't a big deal, wasn't as well known back then.
Okay.
4 years ago. Wasn't talked about as much. So while his case, but as I got to go through his case, and I think that's why some attorneys turned it down, because there were actually some legal obstacles and issues with his case, which is why maybe some attorneys turned it down. But as we sort of went through the layers of what he went through and the failings at each and every level of the justice system, I began to say, well, this is big. This is like, it's really fucked up what happened to him. He didn't even open up to me at first about the solitary. And now when that happened, wow, my jaws dropped. Because when Kalief spoke about his time in solitary, he put you in that cell. And you just felt it. You just felt what he went through. His recollection of those events were so powerful. You couldn't help but want to help him, more so than just an attorney. And I think that's where I began to, when he began to trust me, we began to trust each other, that it became way more than an attorney client thing.
Right. How many hours, because you said that there might have been others that were presented with the case, but how many hours would you say did it take to kind of look through and do your history on this case before you even said, you know what, I'll take this on?
I took it on the first day I met him. First day I met him, I said, let's do it. You know, I'm going to represent you, and I'm going to take care of you, and we're going to get the paperwork. Because the part that intrigued me at first really was that he was arrested 2 weeks after this allegedly happened. So I was like, well, this probable cause issue, which may have been a problem going forward in a civil rights lawsuit, where there's a witness. Well, let me backtrack. In any sort of civil rights case, if there's an allegation of a false arrest by the police department, if there's a witness involved who's not a police officer, it actually makes the lawsuit difficult to navigate, because the police officer, believe it or not, doesn't have a duty to investigate a crime if there's a victim who alleges the crime. So I could walk out of here, you could call the police and say, Paul Prestia just attempted to assault me, and they'd have to arrest me without even having any sort of investigation, more or less, unless there's, with the exception being if they have a reason to question the veracity of the victim.
Right.
So in this case, because there seemed to be so much time that passed, to me, it was clearly a misidentification in the initial arrest. And then you had the 3 years of the prosecution, which it just didn't make any sense to me. How could he be in jail for 3 years waiting for a trial? He was adamant about his innocence, and 3 years to bring in one witness to testify in a courtroom? This wasn't a complicated case. It could not have been that hard. So I knew there was a lot to the case, and I did agree to work with him right away. But afterwards, like I said, there just came a point, I think, again, where after he started opening up to me about the solitary well, when I was like, wow, this is the most compelling case in America. That was in 2013.
Wow.
So I guess I was right about that.
For you, what was the timeline in terms of gaining that trust? Because it takes a lot. Watching the documentary, for those who were really paying attention, it seems as though you guys had this camaraderie to you. He trusted you. You could see it in interviews with Rosie, interviews he was on the street, in situations where you guys were together. You can see that there is something there. But when you've gone through that trauma, you've gone through that mental mind game of coming off of that, how much time did it take for him to kind of let his guard down? Because he's been failed on a lot of levels. How much time, what was the timeline like for him to kind of bring his guard down and trust you, that he would even trust you to take on this case and do right by him?
Oh, it took several months. But I think, he began to see that, or to realize that, I really wanted to help him, because knowing that he had attempted suicide 5 times while in solitary, in my mind, my concern was, that was one of my fears, like, he can go and do this again.
Right.
And anytime, for anyone who's been through any sort of trauma in their life, whether it's a divorce or whether it's something that's, been traumatic, there's a healing process, and for Kalief to heal from what happened to him, I don't know if he ever could, to be honest with you. But I think he knew that I was trying to, that I was trying to look out for him to get him through that process. It couldn't have just been me, but there were so many people that were trying to help him heal. And it's hard to really ascertain, not being a psychiatrist, but you knew he was irreparably damaged, from that experience, that trauma. You don't just recover from that.
No, and watching it over and over as you're telling the story, and he's seeing it on Rosie, he's seeing it on ABC News, and you're reliving this, I can only imagine what was going on in his head. For you, we spoke about you going through a divorce. Was this a situation where you were taking it on, that you were able to kind of get through that Because in the documentary, he doesn't talk about that.
Right.
You disclosed that with me, but I can only imagine what allowed you to push through to be able to help someone else when you were going through your own stuff, trying to, go through divorce and work out your family situation. What allowed you to keep going while you're trying to help this young man get back on track after he's fallen through the cracks?
I think the first thing I said to myself was, look what he's been through. And when you go through something like I have, that was personal with my family, not telling your children that daddy's not going to live at the house anymore. It's one of the hardest things a man can do.
Right.
But looking at Kalief and trying to imagine what he went through, well, that was nothing. I still have my kids.
Right.
And I couldn't even compare, my suffering or my pain, whatever you might want to call it, to what that young man had gone through at that time.
How many Kaliefs are out there?
He pretty much lost everything.
Right, but how many more out there that are going through the same thing, that don't have a Paul Prestia to help them?
I think there are a lot of kids that are still trapped in that system. No doubt about it. There are changes that have been made. But there are certainly young men and women who are still going through this. So, and I think, that's the thing about Kalief's message, which is now his legacy. Right? He didn't want other young men and women to go through this.
Right.
And I think that the changes and the reforms that have come from this, they're incredible. They've been incredible. From bail reform to the ending of solitary confinement for juveniles in Rikers Island, to the changing of the court systems, to closing Rikers Island even.
Right, and they changed the age, right, from 16 to...
They just raised the age, right, from
Okay.
16 to 18, that you can be charged with a crime in New York, with some loopholes, I guess, but they did raise the age. I mean, his case compelled a sitting president to visit a federal prison.
Right, it's never happened.
Never happened before. So you can't understate the importance or the effect or the impact of his story or his case. But that being said,
Right.
there are young men and women that are going through this, and the system is far from perfect. So I think, what we still need to focus on are those reforms and how can we improve the system. This is a time to do it.
Right.
Social justice and this criminal justice reform movement right now in this country, I don't think it's ever been like this. As the momentum is incredible right now.
So now that the documentary is over, and people have seen the 6 episodes, what has been the follow through for you? Like, has there been a follow up with the Rosie O'Donnells of the world? Has Jay-Z reached out? Has Spike TV reached out? Is there any way that we're moving forward to inspire or motivate us to make changes outside of changing the age and making reform happen? Like, what are we doing? I feel like Rosie and Jay specifically, no disrespect, could have taken him out of that environment, maybe moved him out to Westchester, moved him somewhere where he is not in this environment, because it felt like he was trapped. He was boxed in. He felt like people were watching him. He kept saying, they warned me in a documentary. And I found it disheartening that he would still be able to be in the same environment when these people took so much interest to tell the story, to meet with him, that they could have gotten him out of that environment. Do you feel like those individuals or other individuals could have done more? Because it could have been a tax write-off. It could have been a $100,000 apartment, which is nothing. You could write that off. They have money. They have access to it. Could they have done more, in your opinion? Could anybody have done more?
It's hard to look back and say, and sort of second guess yourself. I think to myself, hey, could you have done more to save him? Or what if you had seen him like right before he took his life? Could you have said something to him to change that outcome? And looking back, I think collectively we tried, or we tried. You have to understand his mentality at 21 years old. He had pride, right? He was a good-looking kid physically, but inside he was hurt. But he knew he was still suffering, but he still had that pride. So if we approached him and said, after a couple psychiatric
Evaluations.
well, he ended up in the psychiatric ward twice in 2014, 2015, almost consecutively. And at that point, we spoke to him about possibly going somewhere, like some facility for a while to just get better.
Right.
And, you know, he had tried it, so he had that reservation about doing that. And after being in the psychiatric wards that he was in St. Barnabas Hospital and Harlem Hospital, I mean, his treatment wasn't much better than prison. You know, I was there, I went to visit him. They just basically drugged him up. It was disheartening. So I think we can always look back and say, what could I have done differently? You know, should I have taken him to my house? You know, should we have tried to get him away for a weekend? You know, I think he also had a life, though, too. You know, he had a family. So what was the extent that we sort of cross over that line? You know, he had a family, he had friends. Now, admittedly, his environment was chaotic, oftentimes, where he was.
But he was with his family, so maybe that was his escape.
Right.
But to me, it's getting him out of the environment where he goes back into the same environment only to be stabbed and shot again, only further interrupts his path of trying to be treated because he's still stuck in that environment.
Yeah, he's going through that vicious cycle. He's taking one step forward, getting into school or getting his GED or getting a job, and then he's taking 2 steps back.
How important is mental health, without Kalief even going there, for young people who are going through bullying, being racially profiled? How important is mental health and allowing the opportunity to help our young people?
I think it's incredibly important. You know, it gives someone another perspective to understand what their feelings are and where they're coming from. You know, so it's so easy for people to, well, older people to say, I'm okay, you know, I'm okay, or be complacent and not learn and not grow as people. And, you know, if you stop doing that, growing and learning and loving, then you stop living.
Right.
And for young people especially, it's hard for them to be in touch with maybe things that they're dealing with. So I think the counseling as a support mechanism is very important right now, and especially when you look at people who are going back into society from jails. You know, whether you were waiting for your trial, proclaiming your innocence on Rikers Island, and then after 3, 4, 6, 8 months, you're released, or even if you've been in prison, you know, that there's a stigma to that, to being in jail. There's a trauma to being in jail. And to just be released, you know, into society, you know, can you just go and become a productive member of society after you've served 4, 5, 6 months in Rikers Island? You know, or are you gonna be more inclined to go back and get rearrested?
Right.
You know, because you have maybe not that conviction, but still that stigma that you spent time there. You know, so I think maybe from a social perspective, there's, you know, justice reform is one aspect of it, but there's still the social and economic reforms that need to be made to really make the society more fair and more just. So, but I'm not going to get too political. I'll take care of the justice stuff.
Right. I truly believe after watching the documentary and meeting you and having conversation with you, and to learn a little bit more about you, it feels as though you fall in love with this thing every day. But going through the Kalief Browder debacle, going through divorce, going back into court on a daily basis to help people, how do you muster up the energy, the encouragement, the inspiration to fall in love with this thing again, to help people who may not have help? We know Kalief, all he needed was what, $800, $900 to get bailed out. That could have changed his life. It would have changed, that one thing would have changed the trajectory of what we saw on television. How do you wake up and fall in love with it every day and remain sane for your own mental health?
Yeah, well, it's challenging, you know, but I think that challenge is what really inspires me to do what I do to help people who need my help. There's a lot of people out there who, you know, need someone to stand up to the district attorney's office who are most likely presuming guilt.
Right.
Or fight or fight an injustice that happened to them, whether they were falsely arrested or assaulted by police officers or whatever the case might be. So I think my inspiration is the challenge to do, to be that fighter for justice, because it's important that, and I'm not saying everyone is innocent, obviously there's
Right.
a spectrum between
Right.
guilt and innocence.
Definitely.
But to at least give people that, or my clients, that defense that they're entitled to, that they're entitled to under this Constitution. That's what I think, in theory, why you go to law school, right? You go to law school and you have all these ideals about justice and the Constitution, and for, I think, probably 90% of all attorneys out there, that's not what they're doing. They're sitting in an office, billing hours, and
Right.
never seeing a courtroom.
Right.
And maybe they're, and I don't know if that's I don't know if that satisfies someone. I don't think I would be satisfied doing anything else. So I think I'm fortunate that I met Kalief at that time, and I'm fortunate that I'm able to do what I do. And I think part of my inspiration also is to say, I have my own practice, and I could help someone every day.
Right.
And I was, luckily, I found something in the law that, that keeps me going. That keeps me going. And I still got to hustle. I
Right.
still have to hustle and go to court.
Right.
I got to deal with these young kids.
Right.
But it's always interesting. It's never a dull moment, that's for sure.
That's dope. For you, what are some of the things that you, or just one thing that you could share with those who may be looking to be an attorney? You talk about, worrying about billable hours. What can you tell young people who are watching, who may get racially profiled? Like, how do they stand up for themselves from a constitutional standpoint
Right.
on their civil and human rights? What can they do to get out of a situation that won't be so complex as something that Kalief went through?
June, anything I say on this topic is easier said than done, right? I know how it is out there. Kids getting pulled over for riding a bicycle on the sidewalk, right? Or being stopped in a car because they're of color,
Right.
right? I mean, I know how it goes, like in the city, in Brooklyn, in the Bronx. There's just that disparity with these police officers in terms of who they're pulling over, who they're arresting, right? So, and being in that situation where you are pulled over, where you're basically you're in police custody, you're in a police confrontation, it's very hard to give advice practically. Because practically, when someone gets pulled over, they're going to be nervous. They're going to be reacting differently.
Right.
But I think obviously you want to try to act properly, even if you're getting disrespected by the officer.
Mm-hmm.
And most importantly, look, I know a lot of these stops the officers are stopping these young men and women because they presume or they think or suspect that they might
something
find
wrong.
something.
Right.
Right? That's the whole catch. Well, officer, I'm sorry, why'd you pull me over? Well, you didn't signal. Yeah, okay, whatever, right?
Right.
That's bullshit.
Right.
They really want to just search your car.
Right. But
You
they
know?
need a
They
reason.
need a reason, right? Then you give them some lip or whatever. Your license isn't clean.
Right.
Okay. Oh, got to get out of the car. What? I was just, I was minding my own business. It's like any little thing, and I think, unfortunately, a lot of young men and women of color, because they are at a disadvantage and have to work twice as hard, to make it sometimes, and that's really
Right.
sad. It's unfortunate, and they can't afford to slip up.
Right.
And in a case like that, you can't afford to forget about, renewing your license, because one little slip up could lead to anything, and you could be in that trap in Rikers Island. I'm not talking about everyone. I'm not trying to make too general of a statement, but when you talk about equality and fairness, unfortunately, until we change the ways of the police and society, in these criminal cases, you know, it's hard to really advise young people about how to react. You know,
Right.
be respectful. Yeah, of course. That's the first thing. You know, understand that they have a job too. And even if you think that they're coming at you a certain way for a
Right.
certain reason,
Right.
you got to keep your cool, because in the end, they can turn that around on you a lot
Definitely.
easier than you can
And
turn
you
it
lose
around
every
on them.
time.
Well, depends. If you're getting the right representation, you want to
Ah,
lose. But
that's what I'm talking about.
you know, it's unfortunate, and you know, I think there have been improvements in the city, but we have a long way to go. But right now, the pressure's on to reform this whole system. There are a lot of assumptions that have to happen before we get there, but we're on the right track. There's a lot of momentum behind it.
Because you make a living doing this, in a perfect world, how would you like to see the reform take place, and what changes can we make? If it's just one change that we can make right now to fix the system, what would it be?
I don't think you in this city.
Globally. Well, we can start with New York. Just New York,
Yeah.
New York alone.
Well, I think it starts at. I think Rikers Island, closing that culture. I really think, you know, I think the optimist in me believes that if we closing that island and closing that jail is going to lead into less incarceration and mass incarceration in the city, if it's done properly.
Okay.
I mean, I'm kind of a cynic, so I don't really buy the mayor's, you know, about face about closing Rikers or whatever it is. But, you know, if done properly, reducing the jail population and providing people with more alternatives to prison is going to change, I think, the stigma of jails in this city and of being arrested in this city. I'm not saying that violent crime doesn't occur, and I'm not saying that there's not a place for jail for people who commit crimes.
Right.
But part of the reason for crime and punishment is deterrence, because you don't want people to go out there and commit the crimes again. So what are you doing to make them more viable for society, to give them programs or alternatives to incarceration, especially young people? And I think that the young people is where it needs to happen most, because they're the ones who are going to be most affected, you know. And if we can change sort of that dynamic, then I think everything else can fall in place. And I think, you know, reducing the court backlog and the bail reform system and everything else is going to play into that, where we reduce this presumption of guilt for anyone who's ever been involved with the police or arrested.
Listen, guys, we're here. Attorney Paul Prestia, June Archer, the Winner Circle. Listen, guys, we have to have the dialogue with officers, with our people in the community. We need to have this dialogue to figure out how we're going to work this out. We have to hold ourselves accountable. Know your civil and human rights, but also, if you get pulled over, if you're speeding, you got to take the accountability for it. If you're doing something wrong, take the accountability. I know everyone's trying to make a living doing something, but if you're doing the wrong thing and you're hurting somebody, you're hurting yourself, you have to figure out how to make the change. But when you get caught in a situation, understand your civil and human rights. But if you're in the wrong, hold yourself accountable. If they are doing the wrong thing, don't try to fight back. Get somebody who can interpret the law for you, put you in the right position, and put you on the right platform to fight your case, that you don't find yourself in a bad situation. So listen, Paul Prestia, June Archer, the Winner Circle here. This is 50.com. I hope you guys got something out of this. If you haven't checked out the Kalief Browder story, please check it out. It's on Spike TV. You could Google it. You could download it. Whatever you got to do, but make sure you watch it and have dialogue with family and friends to figure out how we have this dialogue with law enforcement and our young Black and Latino boys in our communities. Keep it locked right here. If there's any questions or comments, leave it below. This is the Winner Circle with June Archer on thisis50.com. Paul, thank you.
June, thanks so much.